Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to what is those one and done lineups from a notable band. They released one album that had a certain lineup. It was pretty damn good, and you never saw that lineup ever again. One and done lineups, really, really great albums from some really, really great bands. So I'm kind of crossing over a lot of different spectrums here. We got some prog and metal and hard rock and all sorts of stuff here. And I think these are probably my 20 favorites. Oh, I did pick out 20 of them. Well, I'm kind of cheating on one. I got two for one band because they had two instances of greatness when it comes to this whole concept. So I'm going to start off here. We're going to go back to 1990. This is an album that only ever saw this lineup just once. And it's Dio, Lock Up the Wolves, Ronnie James Dio, along with Simon Wright on drums, along with Rowan Robertson on guitar, Jens Johansson on keyboards, and Teddy Cook on bass. Pretty cool lineup, really good album. But of course, the allure of Black Sabbath would call for Dehumanizer, and that would be basically the end of this lineup, never to be seen again. You know, at the time, we all thought it was pretty cool because here, Ronnie once again grabbing this unknown hotshot young guitar player in Rowan Robertson, and he plays great on here, and we all thought, okay, he's going to be the next guitar hero, young guitar gunslinger. Never really came to be, because kind of after this, Rowan he's still out there doing some stuff, but kind of faded into obscurity, and this really didn't kind of give him the jump start to his great career in hard rock and heavy metal guitar that we all kind of thought. It's a shame he didn't stick around a little bit longer, but one and done lineup, never to be seen again. Really, really good album, though. All right, next up, we're going to go to 1983. It's the last album by this great band from the 70s. And Phil Lynott put together a pretty cool lineup for Thin Lizzy's Thunder and Lightning. Of course, the one and only studio album featuring John Sykes on co-lead guitar alongside Scott Gorham, Phil, and Brian Downey. Some may call this Thin Lizzy's metal album. Some may call it one of the greatest final studio albums ever in the history of a rock and roll band. I wouldn't disagree with that all too much. I think it's a fine, kick-ass last album from this band before they called it a day. And of course, we lost Phil 3 years later. But yeah, Thunder and Lightning, kick-ass stuff. John Sykes makes his presence known in a big way. I think we're going to see Mr. Sykes coming up in just a little bit. All right, next up. Judas Priest, Sin After Sin, one and only album with Simon Phillips on the drums. So, you know, mainly they called him in as a studio musician because they were kind of in between drummers. From what I've read, they kind of made him an offer to stay, but he had like a million other things going on. Simon, of course, much in demand all throughout the 70s. And this was 1977. Of course, the great Les Binks would follow in Simon's footsteps. Great couple of years with Les on the drums. I think a lot of us kind of wish that Les would have stayed longer. Personally, I would have liked to have heard more from this lineup with Simon. Of course, Ian Hill, Rob Halford, Tipton and Downing, and Simon Phillips. How different would Simon's career have been if he would have stuck around in Judas Priest for a number of years? A long time, right? A lot of the jazzier fusion stuff, a lot of the other, a million other things that he did, maybe he wouldn't have done any of that. Right, he would have been known as the great drummer from Judas Priest, but I think that would have been a cool lineup to see over the span of a few albums and maybe tours. As it is, we just have the one record, Sin After Sin, and it's a great one, right? So there's Simon playing on some of the classic tracks, you know, Diamonds and Rust, Sinner, Starbreaker, right? Dissonant Aggressor. That's all Simon on the drums. Really good stuff. All right, here is perhaps the greatest one and done lineup ever. They also appeared together on a live album, but I'm only counting studio albums here. That is the Rainbow Rising lineup of Rainbow. Tony Carey, Richie Blackmore, Ronnie James Dio, Cozy Powell, and Jimmy Bain. Yes, indeed. Stargazer, Light in the Black, Starstruck, Run with the Wolf, Tarot Woman, Do You Close Your Eyes. Produced by Martin Birch, one of the great heavy rock albums of all time, one of the great lineups of all time. But of course, Richie did not know how to keep a stable lineup to save his life. Once he formed Rainbow, it's the way it goes. You can make an argument that also the Down to Earth album probably deserves a mention on this list, of course. The one and only album with Graham Bonnet on vocals. Roger Glover, Cozy Powell, Don Airey. Great lineup, right? Just the one album. But yeah, Rainbow Rising could be my number one in this entire list. I'm not ranking these, but yeah, it's amazing. All right. Next, we're going to go to Ted Nugent, Free for All. It's got Meatloaf. It's got Derek St. Holmes and Meatloaf on vocals on a bunch of tracks. Ted sings a little bit on here as well. Meatloaf was never an official member of the band, but he came in the studio. Issues were going on with Derek. He's coming, he's going, right? They brought someone else in. Ted decided to release the album with everybody singing on it. And I would argue I would have loved to have heard more from Meatloaf fronting Ted Nugent, because I think he's absolutely amazing on here. Derek is great on here too, right? The title track is so good. Dog Eat Dog, Writing on the Wall, Street Rats, terrific. Hammer Down, just great hard rock songs on here. And I think Meatloaf's just forceful, just really strong vocals, just fit in really well on this hard rock record. You know, we know going forward, of course, Bad Out of Hell and all that stuff, Meatloaf made a career of himself singing the more kind of theatrical rock stuff, but I would have loved to have heard him on just blistering hard rock fare, kind of like what he does on here. So, but we'll never know, right? Because he's no longer with us, and that was the only appearance with Ted. All right, so going up to 1999, I believe this was. Yeah, Dokken, Erase the Slate. Basically the classic Dokken lineup of Don Dokken. You know, we got Mick Brown, Jeff Pilson, but Mr. Lynch is no longer with him at this point in time. In comes Reb Beach from Winger. He fits right in, does a great job. I think it's a really strong album. A lot of great. The title track is so good on here. Shattered One is good. Maddest Hatter is excellent. Crazy Many Goes Round, In Your Honor, so good. Changing the World. Blistering guitar from Reb, such a great guitar player. And this is like one of a few times where he would start popping up all over the place, and before you know it, like a few short years later, he joins Whitesnake, right? Still doing the Winger thing, but this was a one and done release from this lineup of the band. Erase the Slate from Dokken, very underrated album, very strong album. All right, so here's kind of a twofer. We've got Death Human. So here, you know, we've got all sorts of lineup changes going on with Death around this time. Chuck Schuldiner, of course, is every album seemingly putting together a new lineup. Some would last a couple of albums, some would just be one. Here, he hooks up with Paul Masvidal and Sean Reinert from, of course, the great band Cynic, who had kind of broken up by that point in time. Steve DiGiorgio on bass. What a killer lineup, what a killer band. And some would argue that Human is the first real progressive extreme metal album from Death, when they really started to add more kind of progressive tendencies, and I would agree with that. Of course, bringing over the guys from Cynic certainly helped with that. Okay, also from Death, we've got Individual Thought Patterns, and this is the one and only lineup of the band with Chuck on guitars and vocals, of course, Steve DiGiorgio, who's hung around in the band for quite a while, on bass, Gene Hoglan on drums, and Andy LaRocque from King Diamond's band. Who would have thunk, right? Andy from King Diamond playing with Death, highly progressive and technical death metal band. Yeah, and it works, but they only did it this one time. That was it. So you got two from Death there. Let's go to Kiss, Lick It Up. So, of course, this is the one and only album. You could argue the album that came before it had a bit of this lineup on it as well, right? It's not written on the liner notes, but this is the one and only album featuring Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Eric Carr, and Vinnie Vincent. Vinnie, of course, would leave the band shortly after its release, but a big comeback album for the band. You know, Creatures of the Night did pretty well. People loved it, but this is the album that kind of broke them back into the mainstream, taking off the makeup. And Vinnie helped them write a lot of really good songs on here. You know, you got Exciter is great on here, the title track, Not for the Innocent, All Hell's Breaking Loose, you know, fits like a glove, Million to One. A lot of really strong songs on here. Really fun Kiss album. But again, Vinnie's time in the band. Boop, that's it. All right, here we have an album from, God, what year was this? Early 80s. I forget exactly the year on this album. Yeah, whatever. Hawkwind's Levitation, the one and only album featuring the great Ginger Baker from Cream and all sorts of other things on drums, right? Joining Dave Brock, Harvey Bainbridge, Tim Blake, Hugh Lloyd Langton, the space rock pioneers, hook up with one of the great blues rock pioneers, and it's a really good hard-hitting album from Hawkwind, and Ginger's drumming is so good. He would kind of pop up here and there, guest starring with the band live and things like that over the years, but this was his only album with the band as a full-time member. All right, another great one and done. Maybe some of us didn't really think it as such at the time, but looking back, I think Another Perfect Day from Motorhead with Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy on lead guitar replacing Fast Eddie Clarke was a stroke of genius. Not only did he bring some, maybe a little bit extra musicality to the band, but I think the songs are dynamite on here. Die You Bastard, Tales of Glory, Back at the Funny Farm, so many great tracks on here. Brian's guitar work is tremendous, and to think that really the issue that kind of broke this lineup up, that caused Lemmy to say I had enough of Mr. Robertson, is because he couldn't get down with wearing the right attire on the tour. He's wanted to go out there with the headband and wearing shorts and t-shirts, and that's not the Motorhead look, because I think musically he fit right in. And like I said, you really listen to this album nowadays, it's not all that much different than the albums that came before it. Back then everybody thought it was too polished, too melodic. It's still Motorhead. It's still got, Filthy's drums. It's still got that, gnarly bass from Lemmy and his vocals. And just, the guitar's a little different, but it's still aggressive and still Motorhead. So, yeah, Another Perfect Day with Brian Robertson. Killer stuff. All right. Here's a really, really good one, too. Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force, Odyssey, featuring, of course, the Johansson brothers on keyboards and drums, and Joe Lynn Turner on vocals, along with Yngwie Malmsteen on guitars and bass and things like that. This, to mine, I think this was Yngwie's, it still is Yngwie's biggest selling record. Got some radio airplay for some songs. Definitely got played on MTV because you had Heaven Tonight was a video. I saw that quite a bit on Headbangers Ball and whatever. But just a great album. Maybe it sounds more like a Rainbow album with Yngwie on guitar, but the songs are here. And I think Yngwie matching up with Joe Lynn Turner, they wrote some really good songs together. But I think ultimately the egos kind of clashed, and I don't think that Yngwie in the long run wanted a singer that had just as much of a high profile as he did, if not more so. But man, Rising Force, Hold On, Heaven Tonight, Ride in the Dungeons, Bite the Bullet, Crystal Ball, such a good song. A lot of good instrumentals, some great songs, and some of Joe's, my favorite vocals from Joe Lynn Turner on that record. Really, really good stuff. All right, here we have the one and only album from a band called BBM, and that's basically Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, and Gary Moore, and it's called Around the Next Dream. And as you expect, it sounds like Cream with Gary Moore on guitars instead of Eric Clapton. You get vocals from both Gary and Jack. It's just good bluesy hard rock. Great performances on here. I think this was, in the early 90s or mid 90s, this was, Gary's, they'd done the blues thing for a few years and now a way to kind of get back into kind of hard rock. And there was lots of buzz about these guys, and then it just splintered. That was it. But a really good album, a good one to revisit. It's definitely strong stuff. All right, Jethro Tull, A. One and only album with Eddie Jobson. Anthony, you watching? I know you are. Joining, Martin Barr and Mark Craney and Ian and David Pegg. And, of course, Eddie contributes some really, really nice keyboards, synthesizers, and violin on this record. Some really good stuff on here. Crossfire, Flying Dale Fighter, Protect and Survive. Black Sunday is one of their great songs. Just totally killer. They did the whole tour. And then he was like, okay, that's it. I just want to do the one album tour. That's it. And that was that. But, yeah, really good stuff. Really good stuff. Emerson, Lake, and Powell. Of course, Carl Palmer is off doing Asia. The other two guys want to do something. They need a drummer. Cozy Powell, one of the greats of all time. They do this album. I think this is a good album. I don't think it's a great album, but I think it's a great lineup. And if you've listened to any of the live stuff from the tour, it's pretty damn spectacular. And, of course, Touch and Go is on here and a bunch of other things. The score is on here. But I think that had they stuck together, they would have done another record that I think would have been even better than this. That's always been my opinion. I think this was kind of, they were just getting started, and then that was it. So, but definitely good stuff. All right, I could pick a couple of albums from this band, but I'm just going to go with the one that I think is the greatest, and it's they've had a lot of one and done lineups in the history of this band, but I'm going to go Slide It In from Whitesnake. David Coverdale, of course, has got a cast of characters. This is the U.S. edition here. I know the U.K. edition is a little bit different, but on the U.S. edition, you got Mel Galley and John Sykes on guitar. You've got Neil Murray on bass. You've got Mr. Cozy Powell on drums. And you've got John Lord on keyboards. That right there is a lineup to take over the world. But of course, Mel Galley had the injury to his hand or his arm. He was out. John eventually goes back to Deep Purple. Cozy sticks around for a little bit, then he flies the coop. All right, so then it becomes Neil Murray sticks around for a little bit, so it's basically Coverdale, Murray, and Sykes. Then they go get Ainsley Dunbar for the next album. But by the time the 87 album comes out and starts doing big business, that band is no more. And Coverdale puts together a whole new band. But I think, to me, the greatest lineup of this band that, sadly, we never got more from is this one on the Slide It In album. You could basically talk a slip of the tongue with Vi. You can go with the 87 album. I thought about doing that. But ultimately, I think this is the best band that Whitesnake ever had. As far as potential goes, of course, arguably the greatest band they ever had was that classic band with Marsden and Moody and Ian Pace and John Lord and Neil Murray. That's really, but that was a long-standing band. But I think as far as their one and done lineups, that's the one. All right, let's stick in the Deep Purple family, the Whitesnake family. Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band. Richie leaves, goes off and forms Rainbow. They need a replacement. Who do they bring in? An American. Fresh from the James Gang, Tommy Bolin. On paper, shouldn't work. On album, it really does work. Sadly enough, we've got both Tommy and Glenn Hughes, really, really in the throes of drug addiction at the time. And the tour is kind of a mess. And by the end of the tour, the founding members basically say, okay, that's it, we're done. So Ian Pace and John Lord are kind of like, yeah, it's time to call it a day, and they pack it in. We lose Tommy not that long afterwards, but of course David goes off and starts Whitesnake. Glenn does start doing some solo stuff, Hughes Thrall, and a million other things, and he has all sorts of craziness in his life in the 80s. And of course, that John and Ian wind up hanging around with Whitesnake, Pace, Ashton Lord, and eventually the Deep Purple reunion with Perfect Strangers. But yeah, some great stuff on here. Some, Getting Tighter is great, Coming Home, Love Child, Drifter, Dealer. Just so many great songs on here. It's just a really good, just kind of funky Deep Purple with some sensational guitar playing from Mr. Tommy Bolin. All right, we're winding down. How about Yes, Relayer? One and only album with Patrick Moraz on keyboards. Rick Wakeman flew the coop after the kind of bloated Tales from Topographic Oceans. They bring in Patrick Moraz from Refugee, and they do this amazing album, which it's almost like a continuation of kind of where they were going with Close to the Edge. Similar format. You got the one big long side epic in Gates of Delirium, then you got the two shorter tracks in Sound Chaser and To Be Over. Sound Chaser is the Fast and Furious track, kind of like Siberian Khatru. To Be Over is kind of like the And You and I song on here. Amazing stuff, amazing keyboard playing from Patrick Moraz. He was a perfect fit here. Very different from Wakeman, but brings a lot to the table. He's got some kind of a little bit of jazz and classical stuff going on here, and just there's a lot of fusion stuff happening on this album. Very, very cool, but unfortunately at the end of the Relayer tour, Moraz is out, Wakeman's back in. So would I have loved to have seen more from that lineup? Hell yeah. But, we got Going for the One, which is a great album. All right, Michael Schenker Group, Assault Attack, featuring, of course, the one and only album with Graham Bonnet on lead vocals. You've also got on bass guitar, you got Chris Glenn, and on drums, you got Ted McKenna, both played with various people along with Rory Gallagher and Michael Schenker. One of the great, if not the greatest, Michael Schenker Group album of all time. Title track is great. Rocket to the Ground, Dancer, Samurai, Desert Song, Broken Promises, Also Searching for a Reason, top to bottom, just pretty much perfect. Some of Michael's best playing ever on any album. some UFO albums that probably would have a little issue with that, but but I think his playing is great on here, and still to this day, my favorite vocal performance from Mr. Bonnet. So good. And quite frankly, I didn't pick it or any of them, but the first Alcatraz album featuring Graham and Yngwie and the guys from New England, right? That's a one and done. The second album's got Vi on it, right? One and done. You could pick any of those early Alcatraz albums. They're all one and done lineups. And I think the No Parole from Rock and Roll should have been on my list. That's one I just kind of forgot about. But yeah, Assault Attack by Michael Schenker Group. And then last but certainly not least, Black Sabbath's Born Again. You knew I was going to pick this, right? You knew it. I love this album. I love this lineup. I saw it live. I was all over this when it came out. I still listen to this all the time, and I would have loved to have heard more. But if it was only meant to be one time, to me, it's a classic Sabbath album, just a little different. Ian Gillan, of course, on lead vocals, joining the other original three members: Bill Ward, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler. Yeah, we've talked for decades about the production and how murky and it is, and all that kind of stuff. I've gotten so used to it over the years, I don't really care anymore. And I know they keep talking about they're going to remix this. They found the original master tapes, and Tony's going to remix it. And I'll believe it when I see it. It'll be interesting to hear it. But you know what? I'm very happy with the way this sounds at this point. And Zero the Hero, Disturbing the Priest, Trash, Born Again, Digital Bitch. I mean, Hotline. So many great songs on here. And it's one of the gnarliest, most evil-sounding Black Sabbath records ever. And to me, it's still one of my favorite Ian Gillan vocal performances in any bands. And that's going up against stuff like In Rock and Mr. Universe and Perfect Strangers and Machine Head and all that. All this great Deep Purple and Gillan records. I think he is amazing on here, and he was screaming up a storm on the tour. But yeah, that's all we got was the album and the tour, and that was it. So. And that's my list. That's my 20 albums. My 20 favorite one and done lineups from very notable bands. I'm sure there's some that I either missed out on or didn't consider. So down below in the comments, that's what you guys have to do. Start listing some of your favorite one and done lineups, that album from that band who released lots of other albums, right? But they had that one record with a kind of funky lineup, and it really, really worked. And then that was it. So list them down below, and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Also down below, we got the links to our Ko-Fi page for channel donations, our merch page, our Cameo page, and the Sea of Tranquility membership options, all down below. Thank you in advance for all of you who do support the channel. Greatly appreciated. And we'll see you soon here with more stuff. I am Pete Pardo. Don't forget, tomorrow is In the Prog Seat, looking back to 1975. 2 albums released from Rush in that classic year, 50 years ago. We've got, of course, Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. We're going to talk all about them and how important they were to the evolution of Rush going forward. So till then, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.